arms, and the man I sing, who first from Ilium's shores, exiled by fate, came to Italy and Lavinian beaches, much buffeted on land and sea by the will of heaven, by fierce Juno's unforgetting anger. Much too he suffered in battle, until he could found a city and bring his household deities to Latium. From him are the race of the Latins and Alban fathers and the high walls of Rome. The storm-dark waters of the Mediterranean hold no mercy for the exile's fleet, 7 years adrift since their homeland burned. Lightning splits the sky above 13 ships, carrying the remnants of a civilization. Refugees who carry their sacred relics in trembling hands and their grief in scarred hearts. The windlord Aeolus, at jealous Juno's command, has unleashed every fury of the sea against these wanderers whose only crime is surviving what the Achaeans could not destroy. But Neptune, lord of the depths, will not suffer another deity's chaos in his realm. The Sea King stills the waves with a word, and the scattered vessels find themselves swept toward the African coast, toward Carthage, toward a destiny that will save one heart while breaking another. Here, in Queen Dido's court, the wandering prince will tell his tale. The Phoenician queen, herself an exile, who fled her brother's murderous ambition in Tyre, listens with growing fascination to this weather-beaten hero whose shoulders bear the weight of a fallen world. She knows the ache of displacement, the burden of building something new from the ashes of what was lost. Her eyes, dark as the Sidonian purple that clothes her, drink in every word as the prince speaks of the night his city died. O Queen, the hero begins, his voice heavy with memory. You ask me to relive unspeakable grief, how the Achaeans overthrew the kingdom and her pitiful downfall, most sorrowful sights I saw myself, and in which I played no small part. What Myrmidon or Dolopian, what soldier of stern Ulysses could refrain from tears in telling such a story? The tale begins with treachery dressed as tribute. After 10 years of siege, the enemy ships had vanished from the shore, leaving behind only a towering wooden engine, massive as a mountain, crafted with divine art. The citizens poured from their gates to see this wonder, to walk the abandoned camp where for a decade their foes had sharpened their spears and plotted the city's destruction. Some urged that the Colossus be dragged within the walls. What gift could be more fitting for Minerva's citadel? Others, wiser in their suspicions, counseled its destruction. But then came Sinon, the deceiver whose lies would prove more deadly than any bronze-tipped spear. Captured by shepherds, this seeming refugee spun a tale of sacrifice and escape, of how his former comrades had built the monument to appease Minerva's anger at the theft of her sacred palladium, how they had planned to offer his own blood to ensure safe passage home. Break it down, cried some, but Sinon's clever tongue painted the wooden engine as an offering too sacred to harm, too powerful to destroy. They built it tall, he claimed, so you could never bring it through your gates. For if you did, if you welcomed Minerva's gift into your citadel, then Asia would turn the tide, and Dardanian spears would one day threaten the walls of Hellas. What mortal can resist the lure of prophesied victory over ancient enemies? Yet the Olympians sent warnings that might have saved the doomed city if mortal pride had not made its people deaf to divine truth. Laocoon, priest of Neptune, came running from the altar with his 2 sons, crying out to the assembled crowd, "O wretched citizens, what madness is this? Do you think the enemy has sailed away? Do you think any Achaean gift comes without treachery? Is this how you know Ulysses? Either warriors are hidden in this wooden structure, or it's a siege engine built to overlook our walls, to spy on our homes and come down on the citadel from above. or some other trick is hidden here. Don't trust this thing. Whatever it is, I fear Helene's, even when bearing gifts." He hurled his mighty spear at the creature's belly, and the weapon stuck quivering in the curved wood. The hollow chambers echoed with a groan, and if divine will had not been perverse, if mortal minds had not been blinded, Laocoon would have made them shatter that Achaean den with steel, and the kingdom would still stand, and Priam's lofty citadel would still endure. But then appeared the final omen that sealed the city's doom. From Tenedos, across the calm seas, came twin serpents, their coils lashing the water, their crimson crests towering above the waves. They made for shore with purpose celestial and terrible, their eyes burning like blood and fire, their tongues flickering from hissing mouths. The people scattered in terror, but the serpents had come for one purpose alone. They seized Laocoon's 2 young sons, wrapping their mighty coils around the boys' bodies, feeding on their tender limbs. When the priest himself ran to help, weapons in hand, they caught him too in their enormous spirals, twice winding their scaly backs around his waist, twice around his throat, while their heads and necks towered above him. He strained to burst their knots with his hands, his headbands soaked with gore and black poison, while he raised terrible cries to heaven, like the bellowing of a bull that has fled wounded from the altar, shaking the ill-aimed axe from its neck. The twin serpents slithered away to stern Minerva's shrine and took refuge beneath the goddess's feet and the circle of her shield. Then indeed, fresh terror crept through the hearts of all the trembling witnesses. They said Laocoon had deserved his fate, paying for his crime of striking the sacred wood with his spear, of hurling his impious weapon at the monument's back. "Bring the statue to its home," they cried. "Let us pray to the divine presence." Yet one voice still cried warnings in the wind. Cassandra, golden-haired daughter of Priam, opened her lips to prophesy the doom coming with the darkness. But by Apollo's curse, no citizen ever believed her words. In vain she spoke of fire and blood, of Achaeans pouring from the engine's belly, of Priam's death and the kingdom's destruction. Her gift was knowledge. Her curse was to watch truth ignored until it became unbearable reality. They cut into the walls and laid open the fortifications. All applied themselves to the work, placing sliding rollers under the monument's feet and stretching hemp ropes around its neck. The deadly machine mounted the walls, pregnant with armed men. Boys and unmarried girls sang sacred songs around it and rejoiced to touch the rope with their hands. It advanced and slid menacingly into the middle of the citadel. "O my native land! O Ilium, home of the divine! O Dardanian walls famous in battle!" 4 times it stuck at the threshold of the gate, and 4 times the weapons clanged in its belly. Yet they pressed on, blind with fury, and placed the accursed monster in their sacred heart. As night fell on what would be the city's last day, the people celebrated. Wine flowed like rivers, and the citizens, freed at last from a decade of siege, danced in their streets and sang in their halls. Children played where warriors had died, and lovers whispered promises they would never live to keep. In the engine's belly, hidden warriors waited for the signal that would end the world. It was then that the ghost of Hector appeared to sleeping Aeneas, not the glorious hero who had been the kingdom's shield and spear, but Hector as he died, torn by Achilles' chariot, his body black with gore, his swollen feet pierced through with leather thongs. How changed he was from that champion who returned wearing Achilles' armor, or who hurled fire on the enemy ships. His beard was matted, his hair clotted with blood, bearing all those wounds he received fighting around his native walls. "Alas, flee, son of the goddess," the spirit warned, "and snatch yourself from these flames. The foe holds the walls. the kingdom falls from her high place. Enough has been given to country and Priam. If the citadel could be defended by any hand, it would have been defended by this one. The homeland commends to you her sacred things and household deities. Take them as companions of your destiny. Seek mighty walls for them, which you will establish at last when you have wandered over the sea. The phantom spoke and brought from the inmost shrine mighty Vesta and her headbands and the eternal fire, the Penates, the household powers that must be carried to the new kingdom across the western waters. But the hero woke to flames, not dreams. Through the citadel ran the sound of arms and the cry of men dying. From the rooftop he could see all Ilium in the enemy's grip, houses falling in vast ruin like ancient ash trees that competing farmers cut with steel, hacked repeatedly. They threaten to fall, their heads shake and tremble until at last, overcome by their wounds, they give a final groan and break, dragging destruction down the mountainside. The Achaeans had poured from their wooden womb like a black river of death. Sinon the deceiver had opened the engine's hidden door, and warriors had slipped down ropes into the sleeping citadel. Ulysses and Menelaus, Epeius the constructor, and countless others whose bronze gleamed with bloodlust in the firelight. They opened the gates to let in their comrades who had returned under cover of darkness, and now the kingdom burned while its people died. Through the smoke and screaming, the prince fought his way toward the palace, gathering what men he could: Ripheus, most just of the defenders; Coroebus, mad with love for the prophet Cassandra; Dymas and Hypanis, and others whose names would die with their homeland. They stripped armor from enemy corpses and fought disguised as foes. But what could so few do against so many? At the palace, they found King Priam arming himself with weapons his old hands could barely lift, while Queen Hecuba and her daughters huddled like doves, driven by a dark storm around the household altar. "My poor husband," the queen cried, "what mad thought drives you to strap on these weapons? Where are you rushing? This is not the kind of help the time demands, not even if my own Hector were here now. Come here, please. This altar will protect us all, or we'll die together." But Priam's end was written in blood and betrayal. Pyrrhus, Achilles' brutal son, burst through the palace doors, his armor streaming with gore, his face terrible with inherited rage. He struck down Polites, youngest of Priam's sons, before his parents' eyes, then turned his dripping spear on the king himself. "Now you will carry this message to my father Achilles in the shades below." The young warrior snarled and drove his blade deep into the old man's side. Thus died Priam, who had ruled over so many peoples and lands of Asia, his mighty trunk lying headless on the shore, the head torn from the shoulders, a nameless corpse. It was then that Venus revealed herself to her son, showing him the truth behind the flames. "Not Helen's beauty," the goddess said, "not Paris's guilt causes this ruin. It is the immortals, the merciless powers, who overthrow this kingdom and topple the citadel from its heights. Look, I'll tear away the cloud that now veils your mortal sight and dulls your human vision. Here, where you see broken stones and rocks torn from rocks and smoke mixed with dust, Neptune is shaking the walls and foundations with his mighty trident, tearing the whole city from its place. Here Juno, most fierce, is first to seize the Scaean gates, and girded with steel she calls her allied forces from the ships. Now look, Tritonian Pallas is already seated on the heights, gleaming from the storm cloud and with her terrible Gorgon. The father himself supplies courage and favorable strength to the Hellenes, himself rouses the immortals against the defending forces. The divine revelation struck like lightning. This was not mere human conquest, but the will of heaven itself. The kingdom was meant to fall so that something greater might rise from its ashes. The powers had turned their faces from the citadel, and no mortal hand could restore what celestial purpose had decreed must end. Racing through the burning streets, the prince reached his father's house, where old Anchises sat unmoved amid the chaos. "You others can flee," the old man said. "Your blood is fresh, your strength unbroken. If the immortals had wanted to preserve my life, they would have saved this home. It's enough, more than enough, that I've seen one capture and survived one fall of the citadel. Say farewell to this body as it lies here and depart. I'll find death with my own hand. The foe will pity me and seek my spoils. The loss of burial is easily borne. But the son would not abandon the man who had given him life and wisdom. As he pleaded with his father, a miracle settled the argument. Little Iulus, the prince's son, stood between them, and suddenly a tongue of flame appeared to flicker around the boy's head, harmless fire that licked his soft hair and fed around his temples. In alarm, they rushed to shake out the flames and quench the sacred fire with water. But Anchises lifted his eyes to the stars and raised his hands and voice to heaven. "Almighty Jupiter, if you're moved by any prayers, look upon us just this once, and if we deserve it by our devotion, grant aid afterward, Father, and confirm this omen." Scarcely had the old man spoken when sudden thunder crashed on the left, and a star glided from the sky through the shadows, trailing a bright path of light. They watched it pass over the rooftops and bury its brightness in the forests of Mount Ida, its long wake gleaming. The whole region smoked with sulfur. Then indeed the father, defeated, raised himself up and addressed the powers and revered the sacred star. Now there's no delay," he said. "I follow, and where you lead, I am there. Divine ones of my fathers, save my house, save my grandson. This omen is yours, and the kingdom is under your celestial authority." So Anchises yielded at last to fate and destiny. The son lifted his father onto his shoulders, beloved burden, while little Iulus grasped his hand, following his father's steps with his shorter stride. Behind them came Creusa, the prince's wife, and the few servants who had survived the night's slaughter. They moved through shadows where before he had feared no weapons, no crowds of opposing warriors. Now every breeze terrified him, every sound startled him, anxious equally for his companion and his burden. And now he was approaching the gates and thought he had completed the whole journey, when suddenly the sound of many feet seemed to reach their ears, and his father, peering through the darkness, cried, my son, flee. They're coming near. I see their glowing shields and the bronze gleaming." In the confusion, some hostile power scattered his wits, for while he followed pathways and left the familiar district of streets, fate snatched away Creusa, his wretched wife, whether she stopped or wandered from the road or sat down weary, he didn't know. Never again was she restored to their eyes. He didn't look back for his lost wife or notice she was gone until they reached the ancient sacred mound of Ceres and her temple. Here, when they were all assembled and she alone was missing, she escaped the notice of her companions, her son and her husband. What man or deity did he not blame in his raging madness? What more cruel sight did he see in the citadel's overthrow? He entrusted Anchises and his son and the household powers to his companions and hid them in a winding valley. He himself returned to the burning streets, girding on his gleaming armor. He was determined to renew every risk, to return through all the ruins, and once again to expose his life to dangers. Through the empty streets he searched, calling her name until the very stones seemed to echo with his grief. Then appeared Creusa's ghost, larger and more beautiful than in life, speaking words of comfort and prophecy. Why do you indulge such mad grief, my sweet husband? These things don't happen without celestial will. It's not right for you to take Creusa as your companion from here. The high ruler of Olympus doesn't allow it. Long exile awaits you, and you must plough vast stretches of sea, and you will come to Hesperian land, where Lydian Tiber flows gently through rich fields of men. There happy times and a kingdom and a royal wife await you. Stop weeping for beloved Creusa. I won't see the proud homes of the Myrmidons or Dolopians, or go as slave to Achaean matrons. I, a Dardanian woman and daughter-in-law of divine Venus. Instead, the great mother keeps me on these shores. And now farewell, and preserve your love for our common son. When she had spoken these words, she left him weeping and wanting to say many things, and faded into thin air. 3 times he tried to throw his arms around her neck. 3 times the phantom, grasped in vain, escaped his hands like light breezes, most like a fleeting dream. So at last, the night over, he returned to his companions. And here he found, gathered together, a surprising number of new followers, mothers and men, youth assembled for exile. A pitiful crowd. They had come together from all sides with courage and resources, ready for whatever lands he wished to lead them across the sea. And now the morning star was rising over the ridges of high Mount Ida, bringing the day, and the enemy held the thresholds of the gates in siege, nor was any hope of help given. He yielded, and lifting his father, he sought the mountains. Thus Ilium died, and thus were born the wanderers who would carry the kingdom's deities and destiny across the wine-dark waters to a new world. The flames that consumed one realm would kindle another, greater and more enduring, on distant Italian shores. But first would come 7 years of wandering, of storms and monsters, of love found and lost, before the sword could be exchanged for the plough, and the new citadel could rise from the ashes of the old. The wine-dark Mediterranean stretched endless before the refugee armada, 20 keels bearing the survivors of a civilization that existed now only in memory and hope. 7 years they had wandered these waters, following prophecies half understood and omens that seemed to mock their every attempt at finding home. Anchises' son continued his tale to the Phoenician queen, his voice growing heavier as he recounted each false dawn, each betrayal by fortune, each loss that had carved deeper hollows in his heart. From burning Ilium, he told Dido, we sailed first to the nearby shores of Thrace, where I began to build walls for a new citadel and gave it the name Aeneid after myself, though I knew not if fate would favor my work. I was offering sacrifice to my divine mother and to the powers that bless beginnings, and was slaying a white bull to the supreme king of heaven upon the shore. But Thrace held horrors that made the survivors question whether any land would welcome them. When the exile began cutting branches for the altar, dark blood seeped from the broken wood and stained the earth with gore. A second attempt brought forth a groan from beneath the soil, and then a voice that chilled every heart. Why do you tear at my wretched body, stranger? Spare me now that I am buried. Spare the pollution of your pious hands. I am no stranger to you. I am Polydorus. Here an iron crop of spears covered my pierced body and grew up into sharp javelins. The youngest son of Priam, sent by his father to the king of Thrace with the city's treasure for safekeeping, had been murdered when the war turned against the defenders. The Thracian king, seeing which way the winds blew, had killed his guest and seized the gold. Now the boy's spirit cried out from soil made unholy by betrayal and greed. No foundation could be laid on ground watered with innocent blood. The convoy departed Thrace in horror, carrying with them the knowledge that even former allies could not be trusted, that the world had changed in ways that made every harbour suspect. They sailed next to Delos, sacred island of Apollo, where King Aeneas welcomed them with kinship's warmth, for he remembered Anchises from their youth. At the shrine where no woman could give birth and no man could die, they sought the Delian oracle for guidance to their destined home. Enduring offspring of Dardanus, came the divine voice from the laurel grove. The same land that first bore your race from its fertile breast will welcome you back to her abundant bosom. Seek out your ancient mother. There the house of the exile will rule over all shores, and his children's children, and those born from them. Ancient mother, but which land had first nurtured the Dardanian line? Old Anchises, learned in ancestral lore, believed the oracle spoke of Crete, great island realm where Jupiter himself was born, where Teucer had originated before founding the bloodline in Anatolia. There is Mount Ida, the elder reasoned, there the cradle of our race. Cretans have 100 great cities, richest of realms. So to Crete the barks turned, and there the wanderer began building Pergamia, naming it for their lost citadel. The colonists rejoiced to hear that beloved name and to begin raising walls once more. But scarcely had they built homes and assigned plots for cultivation when wasting disease fell upon their crops and people. The constellation of the Dog Star scorched the fields with plague, and the sickly year yielded only death and bitter harvests. Old Anchises counselled return to Delos for clearer guidance, but the Penates themselves appeared in a dream to their guardian, bringing revelation that would spare him that journey. What Apollo would tell you at Delos, we deliver here. We who have followed you from burning walls, who have sailed with you over the swelling seas, who will raise your future sons to the stars and give empire to their city. Prepare great walls for a great people, and do not abandon the long toil of exile. You must change your dwelling. It was not to these shores that the Delians spoke, nor did Apollo bid you settle in Crete. There is a place the Hellenes call Hesperia, an ancient land powerful in arms and rich in soil. Oenotrian people dwelt there. Now report says their descendants have called the nation Italy from their leader's name. That is our true home. Italy, the western land beyond the sunset, where destiny waited like a patient lover. But the sea roads to Hesperia were long and treacherous, guarded by monsters that haunted sailors' nightmares and storms that could scatter armadas like leaves. Departing Crete, they encountered the Struphades, floating islands where dwelt the Harpies, birds with human faces, creatures of divine vengeance whose claws dripped filth and whose voices shrieked prophecy. When the hungry refugees landed and prepared to feast on the island's cattle, these abominations swooped down to befoul their food with excrement and fill the air with hideous cries. The captain and his men drew swords and fought the creatures, but bronze could not wound things born of divine wrath. Celaeno, eldest of the Harpies, perched on a high cliff and shrieked down a prophecy that froze their blood. Would you make war on us for slaughtered cattle, sons of Laomedon, and drive the guiltless Harpies from their ancestral realm? Take then these words and fix them in your mind. What the Almighty Father foretold to Phoebus, Phoebus Apollo told to me, and I, greatest of the Furies, reveal to you. You head for Italy and call on the winds. To Italy you will go and be allowed to enter harbours. But you will not wall your destined city until dire hunger and the wrong of trying to drive us out make you gnaw and devour your very tables. tables, what could that mean? The oracle hung over them like a curse as they fled those accursed isles, sailing north toward the coast of Epirus, where Helenus, Priam's prophetic son, had carved out a new kingdom after the fall. Here they found wonders that brought both joy and sorrow, a new Pergamon, a scaled-down Simwa river, fellow survivors who had built an echo of their lost homeland. Helenus, blessed with Apollo's gift of prophecy, received them with tears and recognition. Here was Andromache, Hector's widow, now wed to her brother-in-law, performing funeral rites at an empty tomb she had built for her first husband's memory. The sight of the wanderer brought flooding back memories of burning towers and dying heroes, and she wept to see in him the ghost of her beloved Hector. "Do you live truly, son of the goddess?" she asked through her tears. "Are you brought by your own fate? Or if the light of life has left you, where is Hector?" The prophet king Helenus proved a more reliable guide than any oracle. He warned them of the perils ahead, the straits between Sicily and Italy, where Scylla and Charybdis waited to devour vessels, the long route around Sicily's southern cape that would spare them those monsters' jaws, the need to pray to Juno despite her enmity. Most importantly, he spoke of the Sibyl of Cumae, the ancient priestess who would guide the hero through the underworld itself to meet his father's spirit and learn the full scope of his destiny. "When in your uncertainty, you will find a huge sow lying under the oaks by the bank of a river," the prophet concluded, resting on the ground with 30 newborn white piglets around her teats. "That will be the place for your city. That will be certain rest from your labors." From Epirus, the convoy sailed toward Italy, but the journey was far from ended. At the heel of the peninsula, they glimpsed the temple of Minerva on the Salentine headland, then rounded the coast past Tarentum, notorious for its harbour where Pyrrhus had once launched his expedition against Rome. Here they encountered Achaemenides, a wretched sailor abandoned by Ulysses when that cunning hero escaped from the Cyclops' cave. The abandoned wretch, thin with starvation and mad with terror, fell on his knees before them. "By the stars, I beg you, by the powers above and the light of heaven that we breathe, take me away from here, sons of Dardanus. Carry me to any lands you will. That will be enough. I know I am one who sailed with the Grecian armada. I confess I made war on your household shrines. For that, if my crime is so great, scatter me in pieces on the waves and drown me in the vast sea. If I perish, I will be glad to perish by the hands of men." His tale of Ulysses' encounter with Polyphemus the Cyclops chilled their blood. How the giant devoured men like grapes. How the clever hero blinded him with a burning stake. How the monster's roars still echoed across the volcanic slopes of Etna. Even as the castaway spoke, they saw Polyphemus himself, a mountain of flesh shepherding his flocks down to the shore to wash his bleeding eye socket in the waves. Terror drove them to sea with desperate haste, taking the grateful castaway with them. For what enemy was too great to deserve abandonment to such a fate? They rounded Sicily's dangerous coast, staying far from Charybdis' whirlpool and Scylla's clashing rocks, until at last they reached Drepanum on the island's western shore. Here, in sight of the promised land of Italy, the cruelest blow of all fell upon the wanderers. Anchises, wise counselor and beloved father, gentle keeper of the sacred Penates, and living memory of their people's greatness, closed his eyes in final sleep. No prophecy had prepared the son for this loss. No oracle had warned that he would face his greatest trials alone, without the wisdom that had guided him through 7 years of wandering. Here, alas, here my father Anchises, comfort in every misfortune and mishap, deserts me, worn out, the hero told Queen Dido, his voice breaking with fresh grief. For this, You saved me from so many perils, O best of fathers. Not even the prophet Helenus, though he foretold many terrible things, predicted this sorrow for me, nor did the dire Seleno. This was my last labour, this the goal of my long journeying. Departing from there, a power drove me to your shores. Thus ended the tale of wandering, but not the tale of sorrow. For even as the narrator finished his account of 7 years' trials, new griefs were weaving themselves around his heart and that of his royal hostess. Dido of Carthage, who had listened through the night with growing fascination, found herself caught in the web that Venus had spun with careful art. The Queen of Love, seeking to protect her son from Juno's continued wrath, had sent young Cupid disguised as Iolaus to inflame Dido's heart with passion. Drop by drop through the long evening, love had been distilled into the Phoenician queen's blood like sweet poison, making her forget her vow of eternal faithfulness to her murdered husband Sychaeus. All that night, Dido lay sleepless, her heart racing with new fire. When rosy dawn lifted up the light and scattered the dewy shadows, she turned to her sister Anna, with words that revealed her inner turmoil. Anna, my sister, what dreams terrify me in my uncertainty? What new guest has entered our house? How noble his bearing, how brave in heart and arms. I believe, and I do not think vainly, that he is descended from the line of powers. Anna, seeing her sister's pallor and the light in her eyes, encouraged what she saw as hope for their kingdom's future. Will you waste away in your lonely grief and never know love's sweet gifts or children? Do you think the buried ashes care, the ghost in the grave? Though no one before could move your sorrow, not in Libya nor earlier in Tyre, though Iarbas was despised and other chiefs whom Africa, rich in triumphs, breeds, will you resist even a love that pleases? Don't you remember in whose lands you settled? Here Gaetulian cities hem you in, a people unconquerable in war, and unbridled Numidians, and the hostile Syrtis surround you. Here desert, waterless land, and raiders ranging from Barca. Why mention the wars rising from Tyre and your brother's threats? I think it was by divine will, and with Juno's aid, that the vessels held their course here from Ilium. The sisters' words were kindling to flame. They gave hope to the doubting mind and loosed shame from its restraints. First, they visited the shrines and sought peace altar by altar. They sacrificed chosen sheep, as custom demanded, to Ceres, the lawgiver, to Phoebus and Father Laiaeus, and above all, to Juno, guardian of the marriage bond. Most beautiful Dido, holding the Patra herself, poured offerings between the horns of a white heifer, or in the presence of the powers walked solemnly to rich altars, renewing the day with gifts, and when the sacrificial victims' breasts were opened, she studied the still-breathing organs for signs. But the queen's passion grew stronger with feeding. The wound lived beneath her breast, and she was consumed by hidden fire. Much she wandered through the city, raging like a wounded deer, that some shepherd, hunting in the Cretan woods, has struck unaware with his arrow from a distance, leaving the steel in her, unknowing. She leads the fleet stag over mount and grove, the deadly reed sticking in her side. Now she conducts the stranger through the middle of the walls and shows him the Sidonian wealth and the city ready to hand. She begins to speak and stops in the middle of a word. Now, as the day is waning, she seeks the same banquets and madly asks to hear again the sufferings of the fallen kingdom, and again hangs on the speaker's words. Afterward, when they had parted, and the dim moon in turn hid her light, and the setting stars urged sleep, alone in the empty hall she mourned, lay on the couch he had left, and absent, saw and heard the absent one. Or she held Iolaus on her lap, captivated by his likeness to his father, trying to deceive her unspeakable love. The towers begun no longer rise. The young men no longer practice arms or toil at harbours and battlements for safety in war. The works hang interrupted, the huge menacing walls and the crane reaching toward the sky. Venus, seeing her son settled in Carthage's luxury, and Dido's growing passion, spoke to her husband Vulcan of her fears. While my son wanders through Tyrian realms and hangs on Dido's lips, I fear what the outcome of Juno's hospitality may be. She will not rest idle at such a crucial moment. Therefore I plan to forestall her with guile and surround the queen with flame, so that no divine will can change her. But she may be held fast to me by great love for the wanderer. Yet it was not Venus, but Jupiter himself who would shatter this idyll. Mercury, the wing-footed messenger, descended with commands that would tear apart two hearts already grown into one. Are you now laying the foundations of lofty Carthage and wife-indulgent, building a beautiful city? Alas, forgetful of your fate and your own realm. The ruler of the powers himself, who turns heaven and earth with his will, sends me down from bright Olympus. He himself commanded me to carry these orders through the swift air. What do you plan? With what hope do you waste time in Libyan lands? If no glory of such great deeds stirs you, and you do not undertake the labor for your own praise, look to growing Ascanius and the hopes of Iulus your heir, to whom are owed the Italian realm and the Roman soil. The divine command struck like lightning. The exile, startled from dreams of love and peace, saw his duty clear before him. Bitter duty that would cost him the first happiness he had known since his city burned. He must leave Carthage, must abandon Dido, must take his people to Italy, even if it meant breaking the heart that had welcomed him as both lover and king. But how to tell a woman who had given him everything that destiny demanded he give her nothing in return? Coward that he was, he prepared his keels in secret, hoping to slip away before confrontation could make the parting unbearable. Yet no preparations could be hidden from a lover's eyes. Dido's rage, when she discovered his intentions, burned hotter than any pyre. Did you hope, traitor, to mask such a crime and slip silently from my land? Does not our love hold you, not the pledge once given by your right hand? Not even Dido about to die a cruel death? Do you even work on your armada under the winter star and hurry to traverse the deep in the midst of northern winds, cruel one? What if you were not seeking foreign fields and unknown homes, and ancient Pergamon still stood? Would Pergamon be sought in keels through choppy seas? The hero, bound by divine command, yet tortured by earthly love, could offer only the cold comfort of duty. I do not deny, O Queen, that you deserve endless gratitude, nor will I regret remembering Dido as long as I remember myself, and breath controls these limbs. I will speak briefly of the facts. I did not hope to hide my departure with stealth. Do not imagine that, nor did I ever hold out the marriage torch or enter this compact. If fate allowed me to guide my life by my own will, and settle my cares according to my choice, I would first care for the city of Pergamon and the sweet remains of my people. Priam's lofty home would remain, and I would have refounded the citadel with my hand for the conquered. But now Grinian Apollo and the Lycian oracles have commanded that I seize great Italy. Italy is my love. That is my fatherland. Words like winter wind, cold and cutting. The queen's response blazed with the fury of a woman who had offered everything and received abandonment in return. No goddess was your mother, nor was Dardanus the founder of your line, traitor. But the Caucasus, harsh with its hard rocks, bore you, and Hyrcanian tigers nursed you. Why should I hide my feelings? For what greater wrongs should I save myself? Did he sigh at my weeping? Did he turn his eyes? Did he yield, overcome, and shed tears, or pity his lover? What should I say first? Now neither great Juno nor the Saturnian father looks on these things with just eyes. Nowhere is trust safe. She called down curses that would echo through the centuries. I will follow you with dark fires from afar, and when cold death has separated my limbs from my life, I will be present everywhere as a shade. You will pay, villain, I will hear of it, and the report will reach me in the depths among the shades. The wanderer sailed at dawn, duty-bound but heartbroken, while behind him Dido prepared the pyre that would be both funeral and final message. Upon that altar she placed his sword, his clothes, their marriage bed. Everything that reminded her of love turned to betrayal. As the barks disappeared beyond the horizon, she climbed the pyre and drew the blade across her throat, her last words a mixture of curse and blessing. I have lived and completed the course that fortune gave, and now my great shade will go beneath the earth. I built a glorious city. I saw my own walls rise. I avenged my husband and exacted punishment from my hostile brother. Happy, alas, too happy. If only the keels from Dardania had never touched our shores. Thus ended the love that might have changed the course of destiny, but destiny itself would not be denied. The flames of Dido's pyre lit the horizon behind the departing convoy, a beacon of love transformed to hatred, setting in motion the chain of enmity that would one day bring Carthage and Rome to mortal conflict. The captain sailed on toward Italy, with the taste of ashes in his mouth, having learned that duty's price is sometimes dearer than any man should be asked to pay. The convoy that departed Carthage carried more than refugees. It bore the weight of broken promises, and the ashes of love turned to hatred. Behind them, Dido's pyre painted the dawn sky crimson, its smoke a final farewell that followed the wanderer's wake across the wine-dark waters. Yet even as one chapter of sorrow closed, another opened, for the sea itself seemed to mourn the queen's death with storms that drove the survivors towards Sicily's familiar shores. At Drepanum, where Anchises had closed his eyes for the last time, the exile found himself completing a circle of grief. A full year had passed since that bitter loss, and now the anniversary demanded proper honours for the man who had been both guide and comfort through 7 years of wandering. Here, where his father's bones lay buried beneath Sicilian soil, the sun would hold funeral games that would transform private mourning into public celebration. King Acestes, himself of blood, both Sicilian and Dardanian, welcomed the survivors with kinship's warmth. The old monarch, whose mother had been born beneath Ilium's walls, understood the sacred obligation to honour the dead, with contests that would please their shades and bind the living in fellowship of shared memory. 9 days of sacrifice preceded the games themselves. 9 days when the spirits of the departed were called to witness the devotion of those who remembered them. On the 10th dawn, when Aurora painted the eastern sky with rose-coloured light, the trumpet's bronze voice summoned the people to the shore, where prizes glittered in the morning sun, and athletes prepared their bodies for the trials ahead. First came the rowing contest, where 4 great warships, Sea-Goat, Chimera, Centaur, and mighty Scylla, prepared to race around a distant rock where foam marked the turning point. Menestheus commanded Sea-Goat with its crew of future Romans. Gaius took Chimera with her 100 oars. Sergestus guided Centaur, while Cloanthus, from whom the Cluentian family would spring, commanded Blue Scylla with her racing crew. The starting signal rang across the water, and bronze beaks cut the waves as powerful arms bent to their work. The sea foamed white beneath the oars, carved by the driving keels as spectators on the shore roared encouragement to their favourites. Gyas held the lead initially, mighty Chimera ploughing through the swells, but Clanthus pressed close behind, his lighter vessel gaining stroke by stroke. At the turning rock, disaster struck the leader. Menoetes, Gyas's helmsman, cut too close to the stone in his eagerness to maintain advantage. The ship struck with a grinding crash that splintered oars and left her wallowing, while the crew struggled to get way on her again. In his fury, Gyas seized the hapless steersman and hurled him into the sea, taking the helm himself to guide his damaged vessel home. Sergestus, seeing his chance, drove Centaur between Chimera and the rock, but pressed too hard in his turn. His bronze beak struck stone with a crash that shattered the ram and snapped off oars like twigs. The crew found themselves stranded on the reef, poling desperately with broken oar shafts, while their captain cursed the rocks and fate alike. Meanwhile, Menestheus in Sea Goat had found his rhythm, calling on his men for one supreme effort. Now, my comrades, companions of Hector's exile, whom I chose at the last fall of Pergamon, now show that strength and spirit you displayed in the Gaetulian Syrtis, in Ionian seas, and on Malaya's pursuing waves. He drove his vessel past the struggling leaders, with a burst of speed that sent spray flying from her bronze-sheathed prow. But Clanthus had saved his greatest effort for last. Calling upon the sea deities to speed his passage, he felt divine favour fill his sails as Scylla leaped forward like a dolphin racing through blue waters. His vessel crossed the finish line first, winning the olive crown and purple cloak that marked the victor, while his crew received silver cups and talents of bronze for their efforts. The foot race followed, where young Nisus led until the final turn, when he slipped in, blood spilled from the sacrifice, and fell. But love for his companion Euryalus made him stretch out his leg to trip Salius, the pursuer, allowing his beloved friend to spring ahead and claim the victor's palm. The crowd disputed the result until wise Euryalus shared his prizes, demonstrating the nobility that would soon lead both young men to heroic death. In the boxing match, Dares the champion stood alone upon the sand, his massive frame unmarked by years of victories, challenging any man to face him for the prizes. When none dared answer, old Acestes suggested the match be declared forfeit. But then rose Entellus, ancient pupil of mighty Eryx, displaying the blood-stained gloves his master once had worn. Gloves weighted with lead and iron that could crush a man's skull with a single blow. The sight of those terrible weapons made even Dares pause, until the hero provided softer gloves for both combatants. The fight that followed became legend, youth's speed and strength against age's craft and fury. Entellus, slow to anger, fought carefully until Dares landed a blow that awakened the old fire. Then the veteran unleashed such power that the very air whistled with his punches. When he finally dropped Dares with a blow that would have killed him, only the hero's intervention saved the younger fighter's life. The archery contest saw skilled bowmen compete to strike a dove tied to a ship's mast. Hippocoon's arrow cut the cord. Menestheus struck the bird itself. But young Acestes, shooting at the empty sky, sent forth an arrow that burst into flame as it flew. An omen that caused all to marvel at divine favour shown to the aged king. Last came the Ludus Troiae, the intricate cavalry display where noble boys on fine horses wove patterns that echoed the labyrinth of Crete. Little Ascanius led one squadron, while Attis commanded another, displaying the skills of horsemanship and warfare that would serve them when they came of age. The watching crowd delighted in this image of future glory, seeing in these children the next generation of heroes who would carry Dardanian honour to new triumphs. But even as the living celebrated, the dead demanded their due. While the men competed on shore, their women wandered disconsolate among the beached vessels, their hearts heavy with years of exile and uncertainty. 7 years they had followed their leaders across trackless seas, losing home, losing hope, growing old in wandering, while their children forgot the taste of settled life. Juno, ever watchful for opportunity to strike at Venus's son, sent her messenger Iris among these mourning wives. Disguised as Beroe, oldest and most respected of the women, the goddess spoke words designed to kindle desperation into flame. O wretched ones, whom Achaean hands did not drag to death beneath the walls of your native city. O unhappy race, for what destruction does fortune save you? It is now the 7th summer since the overthrow of Pergamon, and we traverse all lands and seas, so many inhospitable rocks and stars, while we pursue Italy, which flees from us over the vast ocean and roll over the waves. Here are the lands of our brother Aeneid. Here is hospitality. What prevents us from founding walls and giving our citizens a city? The words found fertile ground in hearts worn down by endless wandering. What harm could there be in ending the voyage here, in building new homes on friendly shores among kinfolk who would welcome them? Why chase dreams of a distant Italy when Sicily offered peace and rest from their labours? But settling was not their destiny, and when kind words failed to move them, Iris revealed her divine nature and cast torches among the vessels. The women, maddened by celestial influence, seized firebrands and hurled them at the ships that had carried them so far. Pyrgo, eldest of Priam's nurses, first recognized the deception. This is not Beroe, mothers. This is no mortal woman. See the divine marks, see the blazing eyes. What majesty of bearing, what features, what tone of voice. I myself left Beroe just now, sick and grieving that she alone could not be present at such honor, could not pay Anchises his due tribute. The warning came too late. Already 4 vessels blazed like torches, their pitch-sealed hulls feeding flames that reached toward heaven. The hero, racing from the games, saw his convoy burning and cried out in anguish. What new madness is this? Where do you rush, poor citizens? Not against enemies or hostile Argive camps. It is your own hopes you burn. Look, I am your own offspring. He tore the helmet from his head and hurled it at the flames, but mortal effort could not quench fire kindled by divine wrath. Only when he raised his hands to heaven and called upon his father's spirit did rain begin to fall, sent by Jupiter to save what remained of the vessels. 4 were lost entirely, but the rest were saved by the sudden deluge that hissed and steamed as it conquered the flames. Yet the burning had accomplished Juno's purpose. It planted doubt in hearts already weary of wandering. Some among the survivors begged to remain in Sicily, to build their new citadel here, rather than face more years of uncertainty on dangerous seas. Old Nautes, wisest of counselors, spoke the words that resolved the crisis. Let us follow where the gods lead and where fate calls. What the gods give us, that let us follow. Aeneid is here, of divine blood. Take him as partner in the enterprise. Make him willing to share these plans. So it was decided. The old, the weak, those whose hearts no longer burned with dreams of greatness, would remain in Sicily under Acestes' benevolent rule. They would build Acesta, a city where memories of Ilium could live on in peace. But the bold, the young, those still hungry for the destiny that had been promised them, would continue the voyage to Italy and the trials that awaited there. On the 7th dawn after the burning, the reduced convoy set forth once more, leaving behind nearly half their number on Sicily's friendly shores. As they sailed north toward Italy, Old Palinurus the helmsman kept faithful watch from Scylla's stern, reading the stars and the sea's moods as he had for 7 years of wandering. But even faithful service could not protect him from divine will. Sleep, sent by Neptune to claim the sacrifice needed for safe passage, came to him disguised as Phorbas, speaking words of false comfort. Son of Iasus, Palinurus, the very seas carry the vessels. The breezes blow steadily. This is an hour given for rest. Lay down your head and steel your weary eyes from toil. I myself will take over your duties for a while. The loyal helmsman refused to abandon his post. Do you bid me ignore the face of calm sea and tranquil waves? Should I trust this monster? Why would I entrust the hero to treacherous winds? I who have been deceived so often by clear skies. But sleep's magic proved stronger than mortal vigilance. The drowsiness sent by divine command overcame resistance, and Palinurus fell from the stern into the dark waters below, still clutching the helm he had tried so faithfully to hold. His loss went unnoticed until dawn revealed the vessel wandering aimlessly, the hero himself taking the steering oar while mourning another friend sacrificed to destiny's demands. As the Italian coast rose from the morning mist, the survivors found themselves approaching Cumae, where ancient mysteries waited in caves sacred to Apollo and his prophetic Sibyl. Here, according to Helenus's instructions, lay the gateway to the Underworld, the path by which the living could descend among the shades to learn the secrets of fate. The temple that crowned Cumae's heights told its own story in golden relief, how Daedalus, fleeing Crete after the Minotaur's death, had dedicated his waxen wings to Apollo and carved the tale of his sorrows in the sacred doors. Twice the master craftsman tried to sculpt his son Icarus falling from the sky, and twice his hands failed him, a father's love making art impossible when it touched too closely on grief. In the cave beneath the temple dwelt the Sibyl, Apollo's ancient priestess, whose prophecies had guided kings and heroes for centuries beyond counting. When the wanderer approached her shrine, she felt the god's presence filling her mortal frame, her voice growing stronger as divine power possessed her human form. Now is the time to ask your fates, she cried as Apollo's spirit transformed her. The god, look, the god. Her face changed color, her hair stood on end, her chest heaved, her heart swelled with wild fury, and she seemed greater than mortal. Her voice no longer human as the god breathed into her. The hero, awed by the transformation, made his request. O Virgin, who alone can pity Troy's great sorrows, you who guide Dardanian remnants through every land and sea, and bid them enter Ausonian fields and wandering cities come to rest, grant that at last our labours find their end. You holy powers, and you, most sacred prophetess, foreknower of the future, grant, I ask no realm not owed me by my fate, that the wanderers may settle in Latium, and the roaming gods and storm-tossed Trojan powers may find rest. But the Sibyl's first response brought warnings rather than comfort. O son of Anchises, seed of divine blood, the descent to Avernus is easy. Night and day the door of dark Dis stands open, but to retrace your steps and escape to the upper air, that is the task. That is the toil. Few whom just Jupiter loved or burning virtue raised to heaven, sons of the gods, have achieved it. Yet if he would dare the journey, if he would walk among the shades to meet his father's spirit and learn the full scope of what fate demanded, there was a way. Hidden in the dark woods around Lake Avernus grew a tree that bore a branch of gold, sacred to underworld Juno. This golden bough must be plucked by destined hands, before any living soul could pass the Stygian waters and return. If your mind is so resolved, if your desire is twice to swim the Stygian lake, twice to see black Tartarus, and if it pleases you to indulge in mad endeavour, hear what must first be accomplished. Hidden in a thick tree is a branch with golden leaves and pliant stem, said to be sacred to Underworld Juno. All the grove conceals it, and shadows enclose it in a dark valley. But it is not given to anyone to penetrate the hidden places of the earth before he has plucked the golden-leaved fruit from the tree. Beautiful Proserpina has ordained that this be carried to her as her own gift. But first, another duty called. Even as the Sibyl spoke, word came that Maecenas, the herald whose trumpet had summoned them to the funeral games, lay dead upon the shore. The noble musician, who had served both Hector and his current master with equal faithfulness, had challenged the sea gods to match his skill in music. Triton, jealous of mortal presumption, had seized him among the rocks and drowned him in the foaming waters. No descent to the underworld could begin while a comrade lay unburied, his spirit wandering homeless between the worlds. So the entire company turned to the sacred duty of funeral rites, building a pyre from ancient trees that had grown in the forest since the world was young. Cornel wood and oak, rowan and pine all fell beneath their axes to create a mountain of timber that would bear their friend's body to the realm of shades. Meanwhile, the hero himself, guided by 2 doves sent by his divine mother, ventured into the dark woods around Avernus. Here, where sulphurous vapours rose from the earth and no bird could fly unharmed, he searched for the golden bough that would grant him passage to the underworld. When Venus's doves led him to the tree where that sacred branch grew, it came away easily in his destined hands, gleaming like gold in the forest shadows. Only when Maecenas lay properly burned, his ashes sealed in a bronze urn, beneath a barrow that would bear his name through all the ages, could the living attempt to walk among the dead. At midnight, when the veil between worlds grew thin, the Sibyl led her chosen companion to the cave mouth that opened onto the path to Hades. Now is need of courage, now of a stout heart, the priestess warned as they approached the shadowy entrance. This far only have you seen men go who had divine blood, or whom Jupiter loved, or burning virtue raised to heaven. The descent began through darkness thick as oil, past shapes that made mortal hearts quail with terror. Here dwelt grief and vengeful cares, here pale diseases and sad age, here fear and hunger that persuades to crime, here shameful poverty and death and toil, here sleep, death's brother, and the evil joys of the mind. On the threshold, war the death dealer, and the iron chambers of the Furies and mad discord, with blood-stained fillers binding her snaky hair. In the midst stood an enormous elm, ancient and shadowy, where false dreams were said to cling beneath every leaf. And here were many monstrous forms of various beasts, centaurs and double-formed scyllas, and 100-handed Briareus, and the beast of Lerna hissing horribly, and Chimera armed with flame, gorgons and harpies, and the form of 3-bodied Geryon. At the sight of these phantoms, the hero drew his sword, but the Sibyl warned him, "Put up your steel, son of Anchises. These are incorporeal forms that flit about, mere shadows without substance. Strike not at emptiness." They came to the river Acheron, whose muddy waters whirl in a vast quagmire and pour into Cocytus all their sand. Here grim Charon guards the waters, terrible in his squalor. A mass of white hair lies unkempt on his chin. His eyes glow with fire. A dirty cloak hangs from his shoulders by a knot. Alone he poles the boat and tends the sails and carries the dead in his dark vessel. Old now, but a god's old age is hardy and green. The ferrymen challenged their right to cross. "Whoever you are who approach my stream in arms, Tell me now why you come, and halt there where you are. This is the region of shadows, of sleep and drowsy night. It is not lawful to carry the living in my Stygian boat. But when the Sibyl displayed the golden bow, sacred token that compelled obedience, Charon's fury subsided. Marveling at the venerable gift after so long, he turned his blue boat to shore and received them aboard. The shallow craft groaned under the hero's living weight as they crossed the marsh, taking on water through its many chinks until they reached the farther shore. On the other side waited Cerberus, the three-headed hound, whose barking fills the underworld with terror. The Sibyl, prepared with drugged honey cake, hurled the morsel to the monster's triple throat. The guardian of Hades caught the SOP in ravening jaws and lay down across the entrance, his huge limbs relaxed in sleep. Now they walked among the shades themselves, through regions where different types of souls endured their eternal fates. Here were the infants who died at their first breath. Here those falsely condemned to death by mortal courts. Here suicides who threw away the gift of life. Here warriors who fell in battle. Here, most pitifully, those who died for love. In that last region wandered Dido's shade, her wound still fresh, like the moon one sees or thinks he sees, rising through clouds at the month's beginning. When the hero recognized her form through the shadows, tears started to his eyes. Unhappy Dido. So the message that came to me was true, that you had died and sought your fate with the sword? Was I, alas, the cause of death to you? I swear by the stars, by the gods above, by whatever faith there is in the depths of earth. Queen, it was against my will that I left your shores. But the queen's shade, no more moved by his words than if she were hard flint or Marpesian rock, turned away with hostile eyes and fled back to the shadowy grove where her first husband Sychaeus answered her love with love equal to hers. The hero, shaken by her unjust fate, followed her departure with tears and pitied her as she went. Beyond the morning fields lay Tartarus, where the wicked suffered eternal punishment, and the Elysian fields, where the blessed dwelt in eternal light. Here in Elysium, among souls preparing for reincarnation in the upper world, the hero found at last the shade he sought. Anchises, his beloved father, standing among green valleys where spirits of future Romans waited their turn to be born. "Have you come at last?" the old man cried. "And has the loyalty that your father expected conquered the hard journey? Am I allowed to see your face, my son, and to hear and speak in the familiar voice? I was counting the time and calculating when you would come, nor has my care deceived me. Over what lands and what vast seas have you been driven to reach me? What dangers have beset you, my son?" Father and son tried to embrace 3 times, and 3 times the phantom, grasped in vain, escaped his hands, like light breezes, almost like a fleeting dream. But love transcends even death's boundaries, and in that blessed reunion, Anchises revealed the final purpose of the hero's long journey. "Come then," the father's shade commanded. "I will show you your whole destiny and explain what glory awaits the race of Dardanus, what Italian children are to come, illustrious souls that will assume our name." He led his son to a hill from which they could see the countless spirits waiting to drink from Lethe's river and forget their past lives before returning to flesh. Here were the souls of future heroes. Silvius, who would be born to Lavinia in the woods. The Alban kings, who would rule for 3 centuries. Romulus, who would found Rome and carry her walls to heaven. Augustus himself, son of a god, who would establish a golden age and extend the empire beyond the paths of the sun. Others will beat out bronze that breathes more softly, Anchises prophesied. speaking of the Greeks who would excel in art and oratory. Others will draw living faces from marble. They will plead cases better and trace with a rod the movements of the sky and tell the rising of the stars. You, Roman, remember to rule peoples with your power. These will be your arts, and to impose the habit of peace, to spare the conquered and battle down the proud. Among the future souls, the hero saw Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, whose early death would rob Rome of a promising leader. The young man's shade moved with regal bearing, but dark shadows surrounded him, foretelling the grief that his loss would bring to the emperor who loved him as a son. Alas, poor boy, Anchises mourned, if only you could break harsh fate. You will be Marcellus. Give me lilies with full hands. Let me scatter bright flowers and heap these gifts at least upon my descendant's soul, and perform an unavailing service. The vision of Rome's future glory and sorrow complete, father and son walk together to the gate of ivory, through which false dreams ascend to the upper world. Here, Anchises sent his son back to the land of the living, enriched with knowledge of his destiny and the destiny of the race that would spring from his loins. The hero emerged from the underworld as dawn was breaking over Cumai's ancient cliffs, rejoining his faithful companions who had waited through the night of his descent among the shades. Now he knew the full scope of what fate demanded, not just survival, not just founding a city, but the establishment of a bloodline that would rule the world and bring order to chaos through Roman law and Roman virtue. The wandering was nearly over. Italy lay before them, and with it the wars that would test every lesson learned through 7 years of exile. But the hero now faced those coming trials with the knowledge that they served a purpose greater than personal survival, that through his sufferings and victories would be born an empire that would endure for 1,000 years and more. The morning sun painted the Tiber's waters gold as the exiles' convoy, guided by divine providence, found the river mouth that would end 7 years of wandering. No longer did they need to read the stars or trust to uncertain winds. The broad stream that would give its name to empire beckoned them inland toward their promised homeland. As the vessels turned from salt water to fresh, from the uncertainty of the sea to the solid hope of land, a white sow appeared on the riverbank, with 30 snow-white piglets at her teats, fulfilling Helenus' prophecy and marking the spot where destiny would plant new roots. Here was Latium, the broad realm that stretched from the Tiber's mouth to the Alban hills, rich in olive groves and vineyards, blessed with fertile soil that could feed a great people. For 3 generations, King Latinus had ruled these peaceful lands, descended from the old god Faunus and the nymph Marica, tracing his lineage back to Saturn himself, when that deity ruled the golden age of innocence and plenty. The king was old now, his warrior days long past, governing through wisdom rather than the sword. His greatest sorrow was that he had no son to inherit his throne, for his only child was Lavinia, a maiden of such beauty that suitors came from every corner of Italy to seek her hand. Among them, Turnus of the Rutulians pressed his claim most ardently. Young, handsome, terrible in battle, supported by Queen Amata, who favoured his suit above all others. But omens had troubled the royal household, signs that spoke of change coming from across the waters. In the sacred laurel tree that grew beside the palace, bees from distant lands had swarmed, hanging in clusters from the ancient branches, while the court soothsayers declared this meant foreign settlers would arrive and rule where the tree grew. More disturbing still, Lavinia's hair had caught fire as she stood beside her father at sacrifice, blazing with harmless flame that spoke of glory bought with war and suffering. When these portents drove Latinus to consult the oracle of Faunus, his divine ancestor, the voice from the holy grove spoke words that chilled the royal heart. Do not seek to join your daughter in Latin marriage, my son. Do not trust the wedding chamber that is ready. Strangers will come to be your sons-in-law, whose blood will raise our name to the stars, and their descendants will see the whole world turn beneath their feet, where the sun looks upon either ocean. The oracle's meaning became clear when envoys from the newcomers approached the throne, led by wise Ilioneus, whose silver beard and noble bearing spoke of ancient dignity, surviving exile's hardships. They bore no weapons but olive branches, tokens of peace, and their words sought not conquest but alliance. O king, Ilioneus began, son of Faunus, no black storm drove us to your lands. No star or coastline deceived us in our course. By design and willing heart, we have sought this city, exiled from a realm once the greatest that the sun looked upon as he travelled from heaven's farthest bounds. Our race springs from Jupiter, Dardanian youth's glory in Jupiter as ancestor. Our king himself is of Jove's highest line, Trojan wanderer who sends us to your doors. The embassy told their tale, how divine command had brought them across the waters, how they sought not to conquer but to settle, offering their skills and loyalty in exchange for a small portion of land where they might build homes and worship their household deities. They had learned the arts of peace as well as war. They could make the wilderness bloom and transform raw earth into rich farmland. King Latinus, remembering the oracle's words, recognized destiny's hand in their arrival. These were the foreign sons-in-law that Faunus had foretold, the strangers whose bloodline would lift his name to the stars. With genuine warmth, he welcomed the envoys and sent them back to their leader with gifts worthy of kings, horses from his royal stables, chariots worked with gold and silver, armor crafted by divine smiths, and a golden crown that had adorned his own father's brow. Tell your leader, he instructed the embassy, that Latinus does not regret the alliance, and let him not fear to come himself to meet me face to face. It will be the completion of my destiny to join my right hand with his, and to fulfill the gods' prophecies. But while mortals planned for peace, immortal hatred stirred to destroy it. Juno, returning from her failed attempt to drown the wanderers in storm, saw her ancient enemies making landfall in Italy and felt her rage kindle anew. If she could not prevent their arrival, she would ensure it brought not peace, but war, not easy settlement, but a conflict that would cost blood and tears beyond counting. If I cannot bend the powers above, the goddess swore, I will stir up those below. From the depths of Tartarus she summoned Alecto, most terrible of the Furies, whose pleasure was in war and treachery, in turning brother against brother and setting sons against fathers. Even Pluto himself loathed this creature, whose presence brought madness and violence wherever she walked. The Furies' first target was Queen Amata, already suspicious of the foreign arrivals and their impact on her daughter's marriage prospects. Disguised as Caleb, an aged priestess of Juno's temple, Alecto whispered poison in the queen's ear. Will you allow Lavinia to be given to Trojan exiles, queen, and have no pity for your daughter or yourself? With the first wind, the treacherous stranger will sail away to the deep, carrying off the girl as his prize. Did not the Phrygian shepherd Paris come thus to Lacedaemon and carry Helen away to the cities of Troy? When words alone proved insufficient, the Fury cast one of her serpents at the queen's breast, where it wound itself around her heart and breathed its venom into her blood. The snake became her necklace, her headband twined in her hair and crept over her limbs. and while the first poison worked its way through her body with liquid corruption, not yet had her mind caught fire with full madness. At first, Amata pleaded with her husband in terms still soft and motherly, weeping over her daughter's fate and begging him to reconsider the alliance with foreigners whose very presence would bring war to their peaceful realm. But when Latinus remained unmoved, determined to follow the oracle's clear command, the serpent's venom completed its work and drove the queen to open madness. She seized Lavinia and fled with her to the mountains, crying that Bacchus demanded her daughter dance in his honor among the wild women who followed the god of wine and madness. Soon she had infected other mothers with her frenzy, and they raced through the forests with streaming hair, carrying Thursoi and shouting Bacchus's name, while their abandoned homes grew cold, and their children wept for mothers who no longer recognized them. But the Fury's greatest stroke was yet to come. Disguised as an old woman, Alecto appeared to Turnus as he slept in his palace at Ardea, speaking words designed to inflame the young warrior's pride and ambition. Turnus, will you quietly watch all your toil go for nothing, and your crown be given to Dardanian settlers? The king denies you the bride whom your blood earned, and a foreign heir is sought for the kingdom. Go now, expose yourself to thankless dangers. Go, strike down the Tyrrhenian lines. Give peace to the Latins and protection to the conquered. Saturn's daughter herself commanded me to speak these words plainly to you as you lay in quiet night. When Turnus laughed at these words, mocking the supposed prophet and questioning her sanity, Alecto revealed her true form, eyes blazing with fire, snakes writhing in her hair, twin whips crackling in her hands. She hurled a torch at the young prince's breast, lighting there a fire of rage and warlust that would burn until death quenched it. Turnus woke with blood pounding in his veins and only one thought in his mind: war against the foreign invaders who dared claim what was rightfully his. To complete her work, the Fury needed one spark to ignite the tinder she had prepared. She found it in young Ascanius, hunting in the royal forests with his Trojan companions, following the sport that had been his delight since childhood. The hounds picked up the scent of a magnificent stag, a beast so tame it came to its master's call, and so beautiful that Sylvia, daughter of the royal herdsman, had crowned it with garlands and combed its coat until it shone like bronze. Alecto guided the prince's arrow to wound but not kill the noble creature, which fled back to its home, trailing blood and crying piteously for help. Sylvia's screams brought her father and brothers running, then the neighbouring farmers with whatever weapons they could snatch, pruning hooks, fire-hardened stakes, clubs of seasoned wood. The arrival of Trojan hunters, following their quarry, sparked a melee that left blood soaking the forest floor. Almo, eldest of Tyrrhus's sons, fell first to a Trojan arrow, his throat pierced through so that the voice that had sung so sweetly in the woods was stilled forever. Others followed on both sides as the hunting party became a battle, then a running fight that spread through the countryside like wildfire. When news reached King Latinus of the bloodshed in his forests, the peace he had hoped to preserve was already dying. From her work complete, Alecto returned to her mistress with words of triumph. "Look, I have perfected discord in war for you. Now tell them to join in friendship and make treaties. Since I have stained the Ausonians with Trojan blood, I will add this too, if you give me certain permission. I will draw neighbouring cities into war with rumours, and kindle their hearts with mad desire for conflict, so that they come from every side as allies. I will sow the fields with war." But Juno, seeing how quickly peace had turned to violence, dismissed the Fury with words that revealed even her own horror at what had been unleashed. Enough of terror. The causes of conflict are established. They fight hand to hand. Fresh blood stains the weapons that chance first put in their hands. Let such be the union, such the wedding, that the glorious son of Venus and King Latinus himself celebrate. The Father who rules high Olympus would not wish you to wander too freely in the upper air. Withdraw, if any further trouble remains. I myself will manage it. As war fever spread through Latium like plague, men who had lived their lives in peace remembered the weight of weapons in their hands. From every city came the sound of forge fires being rekindled and swords being hammered from plowshares. The poet's voice grows heavy as he catalogues the heroes who would die in the fighting. Messapus, tamer of horses, Mezentius, the priest-killer with his son Lausus, fierce Camilla, Amazon of the Volscians, and above all, Turnus, beautiful in his shining armor, terrible in his rage, the flower of Italian youth who would learn too late that some prizes exact too high a price. King Latinus, seeing his realm dissolve into madness despite his efforts at peace, shut himself in his palace and would take no part in the preparations for war. Like a massive rock that withstands the fury of wind and wave, while lesser stones are swept away, he endured the storm of conflicting demands and remained unmoved. Since he could not control events, he would not be their instrument. Meanwhile, the stranger who had unknowingly sparked this conflict felt his own world shifting beneath his feet. The warm welcome he had received seemed like a dream, as reports reached him of violence spreading through the countryside, of armies gathering to drive the newcomers back into the sea from which they had come. Once again, as at Carthage, love and duty warred within his heart, the love of peace and settlement against the duty to defend his people and claim the destiny that heaven had promised them. In his distress, he sought guidance from the river god Tiberinus, whose waters had brought them to this promised but troubled land. As he lay sleeping on the Tiber's bank, the deity appeared to him in the form of an aged man, grey-bearded and crowned with reeds, whose voice carried the authority of centuries. "O offspring of divine race," the river god spoke, "who bring back to us Troy's city from its enemies and preserve eternal Pergama, long awaited on Laurentine fields and Latin soil. Here is your certain home. Here your certain household gods. Do not retreat, and do not be terrified by threats of war. All the swelling anger of the gods has subsided." To prove his words were truth and not mere dream, Tiberinus promised a sign. "In order that you may not think these are empty images of sleep, you will find a huge sow lying under the oaks by the bank, with 30 newborn offspring lying around her teats, white lying on the ground, white young around her udders. That place will be your city, that certain rest from your labors." But the god also brought counsel for the trials ahead. Upriver lived Evander, an Arcadian king who had led his people to settle on the hills beside the Tiber. These Greeks, enemies of the Latins in old feuds, would prove natural allies for the newcomers. More than that, they commanded the site where Rome herself would one day rise in glory. "Rise then," Tiberinus commanded, "and as Aurora rises, pray properly to Juno, and overcome her wrath and threats with your prayers and vows. You will pay me honor when you are victorious." Following the river god's counsel, the heroes selected 2 vessels and their bravest crews for the journey upriver to seek alliance with Evander. As they rowed against the current, the forest grew thick on either side, until they reached the place where 7 hills would one day bear the weight of the world's greatest city. Now it was only pastoral countryside, where shepherds grazed their flocks and farmers worked small plots of grain. They found the Arcadians celebrating the festival of Hercules at the Ara Maxima, the great altar where the hero god had received sacrifice after slaying the monster Cacus in these very hills. King Evander himself, though aged and white-haired, led the rituals that honored the deity who had cleansed their land of the fire-breathing giant who had terrorized the region. When the foreigners approached with olive branches and peaceful words, young Pallas, the king's beloved son, stepped forward to challenge them before they could interrupt the sacred rites. But his father, wise in the ways of divine providence, recognized the nobility in their bearing and the destiny written in their faces. Young men, what cause has driven you to explore unknown paths? Evander asked. What do you seek? What is your race? Where your home? Do you bring peace or war? The reply came not from the hero, but from his heart, as he saw in the aged king a father's love that echoed his own recent loss. Our race is Trojan, our arms hostile to the Latins, and we seek you, fugitives, in voluntary exile. We ask for alliance. We are that same race. Perhaps fame has carried our name to you, whom treacherous Diomedes sought to capture with war, whom he attacked with unprovoked aggression. We left Asia and approached Europe's shores, exiled by Diomedes' might and by the fortune that conquers all. Evander's response revealed the complex web of ancient kinship that bound the Mediterranean world. O bravest of the Trojan race, how gladly I recognize you and recall the voice and face and weapons of great Anchises, for I remember how Priam came to visit his sister Hesiane's kingdom and to see Salamis, and then passed through our cold Arcadia. Then early youth was clothing my cheeks with down, and I marveled at the Trojan leaders and marveled at Laomedon's son. But Anchises walked above them all. My young heart burned with desire to address the hero and join my right hand to his. I approached and led him eagerly to Phoenius's walls. As he departed, he gave me a wonderful quiver and Lycian arrows, a cloak woven with gold, and the 2 golden bits that now my palace has. So kinship and honor joined hands across the years, and the alliance was sealed before the altar where Hercules had received his due. That evening, as wine flowed and stories were shared, Evander told the tale of Cacus, the fire-breathing son of Vulcan who had terrorized the region until Hercules came and strangled him in his cave, leaving the land free for peaceful settlement. But it was the next morning that brought the greatest revelation. Leading his guest to the summit of the Tarpeian rock, where shepherds' huts now stood scattered among oak groves, Evander spoke words that sent shivers through the hero's soul. This grove, this hill with its leafy crown, some god inhabits. Which god, we are uncertain. My Arcadians believe they have often seen Jove himself here, when he shook the dark aegis in his right hand and gathered storm clouds. Moreover, you see these 2 towns with walls thrown down. These are monuments and relics of ancient men. Father Janus founded this fort, Saturn that one. The name of this was Janiculum of that Saturnia. Here was the future site of Rome, where his descendants would build the eternal city that would rule the world. The hills that seemed so peaceful now would one day echo with the tramp of legions, the roar of crowds in the Circus Maximus, the debates of senators in the Curia. What seemed like rustic simplicity was destiny preparing its stage. As they walked through what would become the Forum, where cattle now grazed among the reeds, Evander pointed out landmarks that would bear immortal names. Here where you see scattered huts and demolished roofs once were cities. This Janus built, that Saturn. The name of this was Janiculum of that Saturnia. That night, as the hero slept in Evander's simple palace, Venus came to her divine husband Vulcan with a request that would arm her son for the trials ahead. In the god's forge beneath Mount Etna, Where the Cyclopes labored eternally at their anvils, the smith god began crafting armor that would tell the story of Rome's future glory. The centerpiece was a shield whose bronze surface became a canvas for depicting the destiny that awaited the hero's line. There was Romulus, suckling at the she-wolf's teats. There were the rape of the Sabine women and the wars that followed. There was Metus Fufetius, torn apart by horses for breaking treaty. There was Porsena, demanding the return of the exiled Tarquin. There was Horatius defending the bridge and Cloelia escaping across the Tiber. At the shield's center blazed the Battle of Actium, where Augustus would defeat Antony and Cleopatra to become sole master of the Roman world. Apollo himself was shown bending his bow above the battle, while the defeated fled toward the Nile's mouth, and Rome celebrated triumph over the forces of chaos and Oriental despotism. The shield's outer rim showed Augustus receiving tribute from conquered nations, Morini and Dahae, Africans and Indians, all bringing their wealth to honor the prince who had brought peace to the world after generations of civil war. It was a vision of empire that would span continents and endure for centuries, all springing from the exile's willingness to fight for his destined homeland. When Aurora's rosy fingers lit the sky, Evander led his guest to the place where divine armor waited, wrought by immortal hands and blazing with prophetic scenes. "Take these gifts," the old king urged, "which my divine kinsman sends, and do not hesitate to trust them in the crisis. These weapons will not dishonor you, neither the threats of proud Turnus nor the boastful Latins." As the hero lifted the shield and felt its weight, he was lifting the destiny of Rome itself, the burden and glory of empire that would rest on his shoulders and those of his descendants. The cost of that glory would be measured in blood, his own people's blood, his enemies' blood, the blood of innocent farmers who wanted only to tend their fields in peace. But destiny, once accepted, demands its price, and that price would be paid in the battles to come. Armed with Vulcan's gifts and strengthened by Evander's alliance, the hero prepared to return to his people and lead them in the war that would decide whether Troy's remnant would find new life or die forever on Italian soil. The hero's absence would prove more costly than any defeat in open battle. While he sailed upriver, seeking alliance with Evander, the storm of war that Alecto had kindled broke over his undefended camp like a hurricane of bronze and fire. Turnus, maddened by the Furies' torch and seeing opportunity in his rival's departure, gathered the flower of Italian youth and led them against the wooden walls where the exile's people waited like sheep penned for slaughter. From every corner of Latium they came, Mezentius, the Etruscan tyrant with his devoted son Lausus, Messapus, son of Neptune, terrible on his war horse, Camilla, the Volscian maiden whose feet could run across wheat fields without bending a stalk, across wave tops without wetting her soles. They brought with them the ancient fury of the earth itself, the rage of people who would not be displaced by foreign dreams. The camp that had sheltered the wanderers through 7 years of exile now became a fortress under siege. The hero had left strict orders before departing. If attacked, his people should defend the walls, but not venture forth to meet the enemy in open combat. Better to trust in timber and earth than risk everything on the uncertain chances of battle. The walls would hold until his return, with Evander's warriors and the divine armor that Vulcan was forging in his mountain smithy. But young hearts burn with different fire than wisdom counsels. Among the defenders stood Nisus and Euryalus, whose names would echo through the centuries as symbols of perfect friendship and heroic folly. Nisus was the elder, a seasoned warrior whose skill with the javelin had won him fame in the funeral games. Euryalus bloomed with the beauty of youth, just touching manhood, his cheeks still smooth, his courage untested but burning bright as any veteran's. Love bound these two beyond the bonds of mere comradeship, love pure and fierce as fire, ready to sacrifice everything for the beloved's sake. When they saw their people trapped behind walls like cattle awaiting slaughter, when they heard the enemy's boasts and saw the watchfires burning on the plain, their hearts could not endure the shame of passive waiting. Euryalus, Nisus whispered as they stood guard in the night. Do the gods put this fire in our minds, or does each man's mad desire become his god? Long has my heart yearned to rouse up battle or some great deed, and is not content with quiet peace. You see what confidence fills the Rutulians. Their lights are scattered. Relaxed in sleep and wine, they lie quiet. Silence holds all the wide place. Learn then what I ponder, what thought rises in my mind. Elders and people all demand that our chief be summoned and men be sent to carry him certain news. If they promise what I ask for you, for the glory of the deed is reward enough for me. I think I can find a path below that hill to the walls and towers of Palantium. The plan was desperate beyond measure. To slip through the enemy lines in darkness, cross 20 miles of hostile territory, and reach the hero with news of the siege. The chances of success were slim, the chances of survival slimmer still. But the thought of their leader returning to find his people massacred drove them beyond the bounds of prudent calculation. Euryalus, his young heart ablaze with visions of glory, begged to share the danger. Do you refuse to take me with you into such great deeds, Nisus? Shall I send you alone into such perils? Not thus did my warrior father Opheltes rear and teach me amid Argive terrors and Troy's troubles. Nor thus have I borne myself with you while following great-hearted Aeneas and his uttermost fates. Here is a heart that scorns the light of life and thinks that honour, which you aim at, well bought with life. Their comrades, waking to find the two preparing for departure, tried desperately to dissuade them. Old Elates wept as he spoke. O gods, who rule over souls, under whose empire Troy stands, you do not yet utterly purpose to destroy the Trojan race, when you have brought young hearts of such valour and minds so firm. But the young men's resolution could not be shaken, and at last their elders gave reluctant blessing to the enterprise. Ascanius, though barely more than a boy himself, understood the heroism being offered, and made promises that revealed wisdom beyond his years. All I have hangs on fortune's return, and in him lies my trust and solace. I call to witness my father's shade and the divine powers of the household. What good fortune returns to me by your coming, that same I deliver to you both. Restore me my father, bring him back to sight. Nothing can be sorrowful when he is regained. I will give 2 silver cups rough with gold, which my father took when he captured Arisba, 2 tripods, 2 great talents of gold, and an ancient wine bowl which Sidonian Dido gave. Into the night they went, past the sleeping guards, beyond the camp's protective walls, out into darkness where death waited with patient jaws. The enemy lay scattered across the plain, drunk with victory and wine, confident that the morning would bring easy slaughter of the trapped foreigners. They had not posted proper watches, and their sentries dozed at their posts, making the young warrior's passage seem guided by the gods themselves. But success bred the overconfidence that destroys heroes. Moving through the sleeping camp like angels of death, they began killing the helpless enemies, not from necessity, but from the joy of slaughter, the intoxication of power over helpless foes. Rhamnus, the prophet, died in his sleep, Remus and his 3 servants, Lemyrus and Lamus, young Serenus, who had played at dice until late and lay overcome with wine. "O Euryalus," Nisus whispered as they moved through the carnage, "shall we make our way through the foe? This is our path. Lest any force come against us, do you keep watch far around and look out. I will devastate here and carve a wide path and guide you through." The killing might have gone on until dawn, but fatal beauty proved their downfall. Among the slain lay Rhamnes's gear, a sword belt worked with gold, a helmet that gleamed like captured starlight. Euryalus, his young heart dazzled by such splendor, buckled on the belt and set the shining helm upon his head, not thinking that in darkness any brightness makes a target. They had nearly reached safety when a troop of Latin horsemen, riding late from Alba Longa, with messages for Turnus, spotted the glimmer of moonlight on bronze. Volscens, their captain, called out across the darkness, "Halt, warriors! What cause brings you on the road? Who are you in arms? Where do you go?" When no answer came, save the sound of feet fleeing toward the forest, he knew he had found enemies. The chase that followed would haunt Roman memory forever after. Through dark woods they ran, the older man trying to shield his beloved friend, the younger slowed by the very spoils that had tempted him to his doom. Branches caught at the gleaming helmet, roots tripped unwary feet, and behind them came the hunters, with torches and swords, closing the gap with every stride. When the circle finally closed around them in a forest clearing, Nisus had escaped, but Euryalus was caught, held fast by enemies whose eyes burned with the fury of men who had found their comrades butchered in their sleep. No mercy would be shown to such killers, no quarter given to those who murdered sleeping men. "Stop!" Nisus cried, crashing back through the undergrowth with javelin raised. "Here I am, I who did it. Turn all your steel on me, O Rutulians. The wrong is all mine. He dared nothing, could do nothing. I call this sky to witness, and the stars that know all things. He only loved his unhappy friend too well." But words could not turn aside the blade that Volscens drove between Euryalus' ribs, the steel that drank the lifeblood of youth and beauty. With a cry that seemed to tear the night in half, Nisus hurled his javelin with such force that it pierced Volscens from back to breast, then fell upon his friend's body as the other Latins rushed in with swords. So died the most beautiful friendship that ever graced the earth, cut short by the iron necessity of war, destroyed by the very courage that made it glorious. Their heads, mounted on spears, were carried back to taunt the besieged camp, and their mothers' wails rose to heaven like accusations against the gods who permit such waste of noble hearts. The sight of those beloved faces, transformed by death into horror, drove the defenders to such fury that they burst from their gates despite orders, desperate to avenge their comrades or die in the attempt. The battle that followed raged around the walls like a tide of bronze and fire, neither side able to gain decisive advantage until Turnus himself appeared, magnificent in his armor, terrible in his rage. Like a wolf among sheep, the Rutulian prince moved through the combat, his sword drinking blood with every stroke. He struck down Antiphates, bastard son of Sarpedon. He slew young Merops against his father's prayers. He cut down Erymas and Aphidnus and Bitias, huge warriors whose strength had been their pride, until Turnus proved that skill matters more than size. But it was the ship burning that truly showed the enemy's desperation and divine protection's power. Turnus, seeing the wooden vessels drawn up on the beach like sleeping beasts, seized a torch and called upon his men to complete their victory by destroying the means of escape. Let the foreigners learn that there would be no retreat from this shore, no flight across the waters to try their luck elsewhere. As the first flames licked at seasoned timber, a miracle stayed their destructive work. These ships had been built from trees sacred to Cybele, the Great Mother, cut from her holy groves on Mount Ida, with the goddess's reluctant permission. Now, seeing her sacred wood threatened with destruction, she called upon Jupiter to honor his ancient promise. "Grant me this, dear son," the mother of the gods pleaded, "which your love denies not. Let me not be allowed to see my fleet conquered by any war, swept away by flames. Let the fortunate time aid them, since they carried the sacred things of Troy." The answer came with thunder that shook earth and sky, with rain that fell like the tears of heaven, with winds that howled across the battlefield as the voice of offended divinity. Before the amazed eyes of both armies, the ships began to change, not burning, but transforming, their wooden hulls becoming flesh, their carved prows growing into heads, their oars into swimming limbs. 20 sea nymphs rose from the Tiber's waters, where 20 vessels had floated moments before, beautiful daughters of the sea who laughed as they swam away from mortal conflict toward deeper waters. The sight struck terror into Italian hearts, but filled the defenders with new hope. Surely gods who could work such wonders would not abandon their chosen people to destruction. The battle continued with fresh fury, but now both sides fought with the knowledge that heaven itself was watching, that this conflict would decide more than the fate of a single people. As night fell, exhaustion and the memory of divine intervention brought a brief respite, but with dawn would come fresh horror. For the hero's return with allied forces would spark battles that would drench Italian soil with blood, and decide whether Troy's remnant would find new life or perish forever on these foreign shores. In his tent, Turnus sharpened his weapons and planned the next day's assault, while across the plain, the defenders counted their dead and prayed for their leader's swift return. Neither side could imagine the greater tragedy approaching, that when the hero did return, when the battle was joined in earnest, the flower of both peoples would fall like grain before the reaper's blade. The night passed slowly, marked by the groans of wounded men and the tears of women who had lost sons and husbands in a quarrel they barely understood. In a few hours, Aurora would lift her rosy light over scenes of carnage that would make this day's killing seem like children's games. The real war was about to begin, and with it would come losses that would shadow even victory with mourning. Young Ascanius, keeping watch from the highest tower, saw the enemy fires stretching across the plain like fallen stars, and whispered prayers to his father's shade. Soon, very soon, he would learn the true price of the destiny that heaven had laid upon his house, a price that would be measured not just in his own people's blood, but in the blood of brave enemies whose only crime was loving their homeland too well to surrender it without a fight. War had come to Latium, and war would take its toll from every house, every heart, every hope that mortals cherish. The gods had set the stage. Now mortal actors would play out the tragedy to its bitter but necessary end, knowing that from such suffering would be born an empire that would bring order to a chaotic world, but at a cost that only the gods themselves could justify. Dawn broke over a battlefield where the young and brave lay twisted in death's embrace, their beauty transformed to horror. Their dreams of glory ended in pools of blood that would nourish alien soil. The Trojan chief stood among the carnage, his divine armor gleaming like captured sunlight, but his heart heavy with grief that no victory could lighten. Before him lay Pallas, Evander's beloved son, struck down by the Rutulian prince in his first taste of battle, the golden belt of his slayer glittering obscenely around the young warrior's waist. Here was the price of fate made manifest, not just in enemy dead, whose courage he could honor even as he mourned their necessity, but in the death of innocence, of youth that should have lived to see the peace that this war would buy. Pallas had followed him to battle with a boy's enthusiasm and a champion's heart, seeking glory beside the man who had become a second father to him. Now he would return to Evander as cold flesh, another offering on heaven's bloody altar. The wandering captain's tears fell like rain as he spoke over the young man's body. Poor boy, when joyous fortune came, she grudged you this gift, to see my kingdom and return victorious to your father's house. This was not the promise I gave about you to your father Evander, when he embraced me as I left and sent me to win a great empire, and anxiously warned me that the men were fierce and the race was hard in battle. And now he perhaps, held fast by empty hope, is making vows and loading altars with gifts, while we escort his lifeless son with unavailing honor, he who now owes nothing to any god. The funeral cortege that bore Pallas home was magnificent and terrible. 1,000 chosen warriors escorting the bier, Etruscan nobles and Arcadian fighters walking with reversed spears, riderless horses that had carried the youth to his last battle. But no display of honor could ease the blow that awaited his father. No ceremony could restore the light to eyes that had looked on their only son's face for the last time. At Latium, King Evander waited with the hope that tortures parents whose children have gone to war. When he saw the procession approaching in funeral array, when he recognized the still form on the bier, his cry of anguish echoed from the 7 hills like the voice of the earth itself mourning its children. This is not the return you promised me, my son, the old king wailed as he embraced the cold body. Was I too confident in entrusting you to the Dardan prince? Was my fatherly love stronger than caution? Yet this death in battle is no disgrace. No wound from a coward's flight stains you. You fell facing the foe, struck down as you advanced. I would not wish you to live unmanned, nor should you have sought safety through shame. The sight of such grief, of love transformed to unbearable loss, hardened something in the scion of Venus's heart that had been wavering. Mercy was a luxury that war could not afford. Honor to brave enemies was noble sentiment that the dead could not appreciate. When next he met the enemy champion, when he saw that golden belt that had been torn from Pallas's dying body, there would be no room for clemency, no space for the gentleness that peacetime allowed. But the war's momentum carried all before it like a river in flood. Attempts at negotiation, at finding some middle ground between foreign settlement and native resistance, founded on the simple fact that neither side could trust the other's promises. King Latinus, weary beyond measure of the bloodshed, proposed single combat between the champions to decide the issue without further slaughter of innocent men. Too long have we fought this war at our common cost, the old king declared to his assembled nobles. If we must decide our fate by war, and I see no other course that the Rutulian will accept, let the combat be between 2 men alone, not thousands. Let the enemy champions meet in single fight, and let the winner take both kingdom and bride. The rest of us have shed enough blood for decisions that rulers should make. The proposal might have found acceptance if divine intervention had not shattered the fragile hope of limiting the carnage. Juno, seeing her champion's cause wavering, sent her sister Juturna to stir the Rutulians to fresh violence. Disguised as the warrior Camas, the river goddess moved among the troops, whispering doubts about their leader's wisdom in accepting single combat with a warrior who bore divine armor and enjoyed heaven's protection. Are you not ashamed, she challenged them, to offer one life for all these thousands? Are we unequal in number and strength? Here are all the exiles and Arcadians. Here are Etruscans, hostile to our prince. Scarcely will half of them have opponents if we all fight. He will rise in fame to the gods whose altars he devotes himself upon, and he will live on the lips of men. But we, robbed of our native land, will obey proud masters, we who now sit idly on the field. The inflammatory words found eager ears among warriors who had seen their comrades die and wanted revenge, not some bloodless resolution that might cheat them of vengeance. When an omen appeared, an eagle seizing a swan, but then being mobbed by smaller birds until it dropped its prey, the augur Tolumnius interpreted it as a sign that the many could overcome the mighty through united effort. The first spear that shattered the truce came from Tolumnius himself, striking down 9 brothers who had stood together among the Arcadian ranks. The sight of their blood rekindled all the fury that diplomacy had barely contained, and once more the armies rushed together in that deadly embrace where bronze finds flesh, and young men learn the final lesson that war teaches. But this renewed fighting brought fresh horror with the death of Camilla, the warrior maiden who had ridden to battle like Diana herself, beautiful and terrible in her virgin wrath. She had led the Volscian cavalry with skill that made veterans marvel, her javelin never missing its mark, her horse responding to her will as if they shared a single mind. The poet's voice grows tender as he tells of her last fight, how she pursued Claudius, an exiled priest whose armor gleamed with gold and purple, thinking to dedicate his spoils in Diana's temple. But as she pressed her pursuit, focusing on the prize rather than the danger, Aruns the hunter found his chance and drove his spear between her ribs. As life flowed out with her blood, Camilla spoke her final words to her dearest companion. "Thus far, Acca, my sister, I could do. Now the bitter wound conquers me, and all around me grows dark with shadows. Escape and carry to our leader my last commands. Let him take up the fight and keep the foreigners from the city. And now, farewell." Diana's grief for her beloved huntress shook the very heavens, and the goddess sent Opis, swiftest of her nymphs, to exact vengeance on the slayer. Aruns, thinking himself safe in distant concealment, felt the arrow pierce his heart and died alone among the mountains, his triumph lasting only moments longer than his victim's agony. With Camilla's death, the last hope of Italian victory in open field died too. The Rutulian commander, receiving word that his cavalry was broken and the enemy approaching the city walls, felt the weight of doom closing around him like the coils of fate itself. No more could he delay the single combat that both honor and necessity demanded. No more could he hope that others might win the victory that his pride had made inevitable. The morning of the final duel dawned clear and bright, as if the gods themselves wished perfect visibility for the tragedy they had ordained. In the space between the armies, marked out like an arena for gladiatorial games, 2 champions would settle what thousands had died failing to resolve. The prize was a kingdom, a bride, the future of 2 races, but the cost would be measured in more than the winner's triumph. The young Rutulian came to the field, magnificent in his bronze armor, his sword bright as captured fire, his shield bearing the image of Io transformed into a heifer by jealous Juno's wrath. He moved with the deadly grace of a lion that has sighted its prey, beautiful in his pride, terrible in his certainty that this day would crown him with glory or grant the warrior's death that was better than shameful defeat. His opponent bore the divine armor that Vulcan had forged, the shield that showed Rome's future glory blazing on its bronze surface. But beneath that celestial protection beat a heart heavy with the knowledge of what this moment would cost. Not just his enemy's life, which honor demanded, but his own transformation from man seeking peace into instrument of heaven's harsh will. The terms were simple and terrible in their finality, single combat to the death, with no intervention from gods or men, no mercy for the defeated, no quarter given or expected. The winner would take Lavinia as his bride and rule Latium as its king. The loser would pay with his life for the presumption of challenging the appointed course. As they faced each other across the measured ground, both men knew they were playing out a drama written by powers beyond their understanding. This was not merely personal rivalry, but the collision of two lots, one that must triumph, one that must die, so that the future could be born from the ashes of the past. King Latinus spoke the ritual words that bound both champions to their doom. Let the gods be witnesses to these agreements and this covenant. If victory falls to our prince, the exiles defeated will withdraw to Evander's city, and Iulus will leave these fields, nor shall the race of the wanderer ever return in war to trouble this realm. But if victory grants the fight to our guest, as I rather think and rather wish the gods would, will it so? I will not command Italians to obey foreigners, nor do I seek kingdoms for myself. Let both races, unconquered, join under equal laws in everlasting treaty. The combat began with the ritual exchange of spears, both warriors testing each other's guard, measuring the distance and timing that would determine life or death. They circled like wolves seeking advantage, their shields catching the morning sun, their breathing harsh in the sudden silence that had fallen over both armies. Then the Rutulian struck first, his spear driving toward his opponent's breast, with all the fury of a man fighting for everything he held dear. But the divine armor turned aside the bronze point, and the weapon shattered against celestial protection, like mortal hope against heaven's design. The Trojan captain's return cast was true, his spear driven with the strength of one who fought not for personal glory, but for the lot of unborn generations. The point found its mark in his enemy's thigh, sending the Rutulian champion to his knees, as blood flowed bright across the grass. Wounded but not yet beaten, the young warrior fought on with the desperate courage of one who knows he faces his final hour. His sword rose and fell like lightning, but each blow that should have found flesh met only the impenetrable protection that heaven had provided. Meanwhile, his opponent pressed the attack with remorseless efficiency, driving the younger man back step by step toward the moment when courage would no longer suffice. The end came suddenly, as ends always do in battle. The Rutulian stumbled over a stone, placed there, some said, by angry gods who would no longer tolerate resistance to their will, and fell backward, his guard open, his death certain. The exile's blade rose for the killing stroke, and in that moment their eyes met across the gulf that separates the living from the dying. "I am beaten," the fallen champion whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "The Orsonians have seen me stretch out my hands in defeat. Lavinia is your wife. Do not extend your hatred further." For a heartbeat, the conqueror hesitated. Here was a brave enemy offering submission, a young man whose only crime had been loving his homeland too much to surrender it without a fight. Mercy whispered that enough blood had been shed, that magnanimity would honor both victor and vanquished. But then the Dardan prince's gaze fell upon the golden belt that circled his enemy's waist, Pallas's belt, torn from the young man's body as he lay dying, worn now like a trophy by his killer. In that moment, memory of Evander's grief blazed up like fire, and Mercy died before the altar of vengeance. "You appeal to me, wearing the spoils stripped from my people." The words came cold as winter wind, implacable as the appointed course itself. "Pallas strikes this blow. Pallas sacrifices you and exacts payment with your guilty blood." The sword drove home, with all the force of heaven's design behind it, piercing heart and hope together. The Rutulian's life fled indignant to the shades below, leaving behind only the empty shell of what had been the flower of Italian youth, the pride of his people, the last champion of a race who would now learn to call foreigners their masters. So ended the war that had raged across Latium like a fever, leaving the land scarred with graves and watered with tears. The scion of Venus stood alone on the field where so many brave men had died, feeling not triumph but the terrible weight of the crown that heaven's design had placed upon his brow. He had won a kingdom, but the price of that victory would haunt him to his final day. The surviving Italians, seeing their champion dead, laid down their weapons and acknowledged defeat. The age of resistance was over. The age of Roman rule had begun. But the cost had been so high, the suffering so great, that even the winners would remember this day with sorrow rather than celebration. As the young warrior's soul fled to the underworld, the poet's voice follows it with something like mourning for the waste of noble life that the appointed course demands as the price of its grand designs. The fallen champion had died as warriors die, facing his lot with courage even when hope was gone. He deserved a better end than this, a gentler doom than becoming a stepping stone for another's glory. But heaven's design is deaf to human wishes, blind to human tears. What must be will be, and the price will be paid by whoever stands in the path of divine will. The new age was dawning, but it rose from ashes of the old, and its light was stained with the blood of all who had died resisting changes they could not prevent and could not understand. The blood of the fallen prince had barely dried upon Italian soil when silence fell across the battlefield. Not the quiet of peace, but the hushed awe of mortals who had witnessed fate itself written in bronze and flesh. The Trojan chief stood alone among the carnage, Vulcan's divine armor gleaming like captured starlight, but his victory felt hollow as autumn wind through empty chambers. He had won a kingdom, claimed a bride, fulfilled the prophecies that had driven him across wine-dark seas, yet the taste in his mouth was bitter as wormwood, salt as tears. This was the moment Virgil had labored 7 years to create, the climactic instant where personal choice collides with cosmic necessity, where mercy dies on the altar of vengeance, where the founding of civilization requires the sacrifice of everything gentle in the human heart. For the poet understood what his readers in Augustus's golden age sometimes forgot, that dominion, however glorious, is always built upon the bones of the conquered, that order's light casts shadows deeper than any barbarian darkness. The shield that the exile bore upon his arm told a different story than the one his eyes had witnessed. There, wrought in deathless bronze by divine artifice, Augustus Caesar received the submission of conquered nations, while peace herself closed the gates of Janus's temple. There, the Battle of Actium showed the city's triumph over Egyptian decadence, order conquering chaos, the future rescuing the world from civil war's abyss. But here, on this blood-soaked field in Latium, the price of that future glory lay scattered in pieces that no artist would ever commemorate. Pallas, beautiful in his youth, struck down before his valor could ripen into wisdom. Lausus, defending a father whose cruelty he could not see, but whose blood he shared nonetheless. Camilla, swift as wind across wave-tops, brought low by the very glory she pursued. Nisus and Euryalus, whose love had been pure as spring water until war corrupted it into mutual destruction. And now the Rutulian champion himself, magnificent in his pride, terrible in his courage, dead because he loved his homeland more than life itself. These were the offerings that heaven's plan demanded for the city's birth, not the blood of cowards or villains, but the heart's blood of heroes, the life force of the young and brave and beautiful. Dominion could only be purchased with such coin, and the purchasing was a wound that would never heal. a necessary evil that remained evil despite its necessity. The poet's voice carries the weight of this knowledge as he traces the arc of his wandering hero's journey from the ashes of Troy to the throne of Latium. What began as a tale of survival, refugees fleeing their burning city with household gods clutched in trembling hands, had transformed into something far more complex, a meditation on the cost of greatness, the price of civilization, the tragic necessity of choosing duty over desire, justice over mercy, the claims of the future over the bonds of the present. For Virgil, writing in an age when Augustus had brought peace to a world exhausted by generations of civil war, understood both the glory and the burden of what the eternal city had become. The commonwealth that stretched from Britain's misty shores to Egypt's burning sands, that had built roads and aqueducts and forums in lands where wolves once howled, that had given law and language and literature to barbarian tribes. This marvel of human organization had not sprung from nothing. It grew from seeds planted in Trojan soil, watered with Italian blood, tended by hands that had learned to choose necessity over inclination. The shield's imagery revealed the pattern that connected past to present, legend to history, the exile's personal suffering to the Commonwealth's public glory. There was Romulus, suckling at the she-wolf's teats, founder born from the marriage of civilization and wildness, learning strength from the very forces he would later subdue. There were the rape of the Sabine women and the wars that followed, showing how the city had always grown through the integration of former enemies, turning conquest into kinship, defeat into alliance. There was Horatius defending the bridge while his home burned behind him, demonstrating that individual courage could preserve collective identity when survival seemed impossible. There was Cloelia escaping across the Tiber, proving that the city's women possessed the same virtue as its men, that the Commonwealth's strength flowed from both genders sharing its burdens and its glory. But the shield's center blazed with contemporary triumph. Augustus himself at Actium, receiving divine favor as he restored order to a world that had forgotten the meaning of peace. Apollo bent his golden bow above the battle, while eastern forces fled toward the Nile's mouth, their defeat marking the end of an era when citizens killed citizens in pursuit of personal ambition. The victor stood resplendent in his glory, but his triumph was also a burden, the weight of ruling justly, of maintaining the peace that had cost so much to achieve. Virgil had lived through those civil wars that preceded Augustus's victory. He had seen the prescription lists posted in the forum, had watched friends and neighbors murdered for their political opinions, had witnessed the Republic's slow death by suicide as it tore itself apart in fratricidal fury. The poet knew what chaos looked like, understood what civilization meant because he had watched it nearly perish. His epic was both celebration and warning. Celebration of what the city had achieved. Warning of what it might lose if it forgot the virtues that had made achievement possible. The connections between mythic past and political present ran deeper than mere allegory. Augustus himself claimed descent from Iulus, the exile's son, making the Aeneid a family history as well as a national epic. The emperor's adoptive father, Julius Caesar, had traced his lineage back to Venus through the same genealogical chain that made the Trojan prince semi-divine. What seemed like ancient legend was also contemporary politics. What appeared to be mythological fiction was simultaneously dynastic propaganda. Yet Virgil's genius lay in making this propaganda serve larger truths about human nature and historical process. The poet understood that Augustus's regime, however beneficial, represented the end of something precious, the death of the Republic, the transformation of citizens into subjects, the replacement of competitive virtue with submission to authority. The Aeneid simultaneously celebrates this transformation and mourns what was lost in achieving it. The exile's character embodies this ambivalence. He is dutiful where Achilles was willful, pious where Odysseus was clever, devoted to collective good where Homeric heroes pursued personal glory. He represents a new kind of heroism, appropriate to an age that valued order above individual excellence, stability above competitive achievement. Yet this very virtue makes him somehow less compelling than his Greek predecessors. More admirable, perhaps, but less vivid, less immediate, less recognizably human in his passions and weaknesses. The poet's treatment of love throughout the epic reveals the same tension between public necessity and private desire. Dido's passion for the wandering prince produces some of the most beautiful poetry in any language, but it must be sacrificed to the appointed lot. Lavinia, the bride whose marriage will unite two peoples, remains virtually voiceless throughout the poem, a symbol rather than a character, a prize rather than a person. Even the pure love of Nisus and Euryalus becomes an instrument of destruction when channeled through war's necessities. This subordination of personal feeling to political purpose reflects the Augustan age's ambivalent relationship with emotion itself. The emperor's regime promised order, prosperity, and peace in exchange for the passionate engagement that had characterized Republican politics. Citizens were asked to trade the dangerous freedom to make bad choices for the security of having good choices made for them. The Aeneid both justifies this bargain and reveals its psychological costs. Virgil's literary technique mirrors his thematic concerns, where Homer's heroes speak in their own voices, revealing character through direct expression. The Aeneid's figures often seem to speak with the poet's voice, their individual personalities subsumed into the larger patterns of historical inevitability. This creates a different kind of poetry, more meditative, more melancholy, more conscious of the gap between human aspiration and cosmic design. The poet's relationship with his Homeric models shows the same complex mixture of homage and transformation. The Aeneid's first half deliberately echoes the Odyssey's wandering narrative, while its second half reworks the Iliad's martial themes. But Virgil transforms his sources in ways that reflect changed historical circumstances and evolved literary sensibilities. His war scenes emphasize suffering more than glory. His wandering episodes stress duty more than adventure. His divine interventions serve larger purposes than the personal whims that motivate Homer's gods. The influence of Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism, runs throughout the epic in ways that would have been impossible for Homer. The concept of fate that drives the narrative is not the capricious fortune of archaic thought, but the rational providence of philosophical reflection. The gods themselves, though they retain their mythological personalities, serve a cosmic order that tends toward justice and harmony, rather than mere power and passion. This philosophical dimension gives the Aeneid a depth of reflection that its models lack, but it also creates a certain distance between reader and text. We admire the wandering prince's virtue without necessarily feeling the immediate connection that Homer's flawed heroes inspire. Virgil's achievement is different from Homer's, less primitive, more sophisticated, but also somehow less urgent, less emotionally direct. The poet's use of prophecy throughout the epic serves multiple functions beyond mere plot advancement. When Anchises reveals the future souls of the city in the Underworld, when the shield displays scenes of coming history, when various oracles and omens point toward the allotted end, Virgil is not simply showing off his knowledge of subsequent events. He is demonstrating how individual actions connect to larger patterns, how personal choices serve purposes beyond their immediate intentions. This prophetic structure also allows the poet to address his contemporary audience directly, while maintaining the fiction of ancient narrative. When Anchises mourns the early death of Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, the grief belongs simultaneously to the mythical father and the historical emperor. When the shield shows Eastern forces fleeing at Actium, the triumph celebrates both legendary victory and recent political achievement. The unfinished state of the Aeneid. Virgil died before completing his final revisions and allegedly wished the manuscript destroyed, adds another layer of meaning to the epic's themes. Just as the hegemony was still expanding at the time of composition, just as Augustus's reign represented a beginning rather than an end. So the poem itself remains open to interpretation, incomplete in ways that mirror the historical process it describes. Modern readers often find the Aeneid's political message troubling, its celebration of territorial expansion difficult to accept, in an age that has witnessed the costs of dominion more clearly than its benefits. Yet Virgil's genius lies precisely in his ability to show both sides of the equation, the glory and the grief, the triumph and the tragedy, the necessity and the loss. He creates a poem that can be read as propaganda or as protest, as celebration or as elegy. The epic's influence on subsequent literature has been enormous, shaping everything from Dante's Divine Comedy to Milton's Paradise Lost. But its historical influence may be even greater. For over a millennium, educated Europeans learned their Latin from Virgil's verses, absorbed their ideas about duty and fate from his example, understood their relationship to political authority through his meditations on governance and individual obligation. The Aeneid became the text that explained the eternal city to itself and to its successors. It provided a foundational myth that made territorial expansion seem not merely advantageous, but morally necessary, not simply profitable, but divinely ordained. The poem's vision of order emerging from chaos, of civilization conquering barbarism, of universal peace achieved through central dominion, shaped Western political thought for centuries. Yet Virgil's own ambivalence about these themes ensures that the epic remains more complex than mere propaganda. The poet who celebrated Augustus's peace was also the man who wrote the eclogue's pastoral vision of withdrawal from political engagement. The author who glorified the appointed lot was also the artist who created Dido's passion and mourned Turnus's death. The Aeneid contains its own critique, carries its own shadow, admits its own costs, even as it proclaims its necessity. In the end, the wandering prince stands as a figure both heroic and tragic, admirable and pitiable, successful and diminished. He achieves everything that heaven's plan demands, but loses much of what makes life worth living in the achievement. His victory is real, but not complete. His triumph shadowed by the knowledge of what had to be sacrificed to make it possible. This is Virgil's gift to world literature, a hero who embodies the complex relationship between personal desire and public duty, between individual fulfillment and collective necessity, between human aspiration and historical process. The Trojan exile becomes a mirror in which we can see our own struggles to balance competing claims, our own attempts to serve larger purposes while remaining true to private convictions. The epic ends not with celebration, but with exhaustion, not with triumph, but with tragedy, not with the beginning of peace, but with the end of war. The future that the shield promises will indeed come to pass, but it will be built upon the graves of the noble dead, and those who inherit it will need to remember the price that was paid for their prosperity. That remembrance is Virgil's final gift, The knowledge that dominion, however necessary, is always a burden, and that those who bear it must do so with humility, justice, and constant awareness of its human cost.